429, the Vandals, a Germanic people originally from southern present-day Poland, migrated to North Africa. Unable to control them militarily, the crumbling Roman Empire allowed them to settle in the region. Over the following decades, they conquered islands such as Majorca, Sicily, Sardinia and Corsica, and also captured the historically important city of Carthage. They participated in the Third Sack of Rome, although its kings maintained remarkably friendly relations with the Byzantine Empire. All that changed in the 6th century, however, when the Vandal War broke out, culminating in the famous Battle of Tricameron, which marked the end of the established Vandal kingdom. In 527, Justinian became Byzantine emperor, described as a great legislator, builder, administrator and devout Christian, a fact confirmed in his eulogy. One of the most important tasks he undertook upon ascending the throne was to reconquer the former territories of the Western Roman Empire, the so-called peninsular regeneration of Perea. These lands had been lost to Germanic invaders, particularly the Ostrogoths, Visigoths and Vandals. Moreover, Justinian sought to centralize power in the person of the Eastern Roman Emperor, adopting his motto, "One Empire, One Law." But around 530 AD, the tide turned when the young general Thoracin Belisarius assumed command. A force of 25,000 men faced 40,000 Persians at the Battle of Darius, despite their overwhelming numerical superiority. Thanks to Belisarius's skillful leadership, the Byzantines triumphed, attempting to make up for their defeat. The Sassanids launched a full-scale invasion of the kingdom, Roman territory. He set his sights on the Vandal kingdom in North Africa. Traditionally, the Vandal kingdom had been a loyal vassal for Byzantium. Contemporaries noted that its king, Hilderic, was a very special friend and guest of Justinian, who had not yet ascended the throne. But all that changed when, after being deposed in a rebellion, Gelimer restored Arianism as the kingdom's religion and began persecuting Catholics. Justinian initially tried to resolve the conflict diplomatically, but Gelimer responded that the Byzantine emperor had no authority over his own lands, given the neighbouring kingdoms. Justinian formed an alliance with the Ostrogoths to prevent the Vandals from forming an alliance. Justinian then abandoned his most capable commander to deal with the Vandals. Belisarius took command of a Byzantine expeditionary force in the late summer of 533. He and his soldiers were transported on 500 ships, accompanied by 92 camels, and landed at Cape Valda. With approximately 15,000 soldiers, 10,000 infantry and 5,000 cavalry, his army consisted of Byzantines, mercenaries and numerous local auxiliary units. When Gelimer learned of their arrival, he began preparing for battle. However, he was at a severe disadvantage at the time. The Sardinians had revolted against his rule. He sent his brother Zarzon and 7,000 soldiers to the island to suppress the revolt. Belisarius was rapidly advancing toward Carthage, the Vandals' poorly equipped capital. They set up camp south of the city. Before advancing on it on September 13th, on their way north, they encountered a small force of Vandals at Tricameron, 10 miles south of Carthage. They quickly defeated the smaller force, but it turned out to be a bait for an ambush by Galimard, although it was actually a Byzantine army from Lessaria. They defeated the Vandals' forces and continued on to Carthage. When they arrived 2 days later, they captured the city. Things were beginning to unravel around Gelimer, but the real war had yet to begin. Gelimer fled west, setting up his headquarters in Bulla Regia. Gelimer realized that if he wanted to win this war, he would have to decisively defeat the Byzantine army, but he also knew that he would not miss an opportunity against a better-armed Byzantine army. The vast majority of his army consisted of cavalry. This army, called the Horse Army, is sometimes described as the forerunner of the knights of the late Middle Ages. However, the vast majority of his army was made up of conscripts, while the Byzantine army relied on volunteers. He began doing everything he could to strengthen his army. First, he sent a message to his brother Zarzon in Sardinia, asking him to return as soon as possible. He also offered financial rewards if the local auxiliary forces supporting Belisarius would defect. By December, Zazan's army had reached 15,000 soldiers. Gelimer now commanded between 15,000 and 20,000 soldiers, most of whom were cavalry. The decisive moment seemed to have arrived. As his army lined up and advanced toward Carthage, Belisarius learned of his movements in Carthage and left the city with his army and headed west. He left behind a small contingent of no more than 500 men in anticipation of a Vandal attack on the capital. The two armies were advancing toward each other in anticipation of the final battle. The Vandal, Gelimer, had encamped the night before at Tricameron, north of a shallow creek, 17 miles west of Carthage. Commanding between 15,000 and 20,000 troops, Gelimer vastly outnumbered the Byzantines. Most of them were cavalry. Evidence suggests that most wore simple armour and helmets, mail armour. They were a formidable force in battle. On the morning of December 15th, Gelimer ordered his troops to withdraw from their camp. Some sources indicate that Gelimer attempted to force the Byzantines into battle at the Tricameron, estimating that the Byzantines would arrive before noon. He knew that their soldiers had eaten lunch and wanted to force them to fight on empty stomachs. Other sources indicate that Gelimer's forces were in disarray, and that the Vandal king did not expect to encounter the Byzantines at this stage. However, most modern historians agree that Gelimer was aware of Byzantine movements and believed he had a numerical advantage, as long as the Byzantine infantry was not. He had not arrived, so it was in his best interest to force a battle as soon as possible. Meanwhile, the Byzantines expected no confrontation at all. John the Armenian, one of Belisarius's trusted generals. The reason for this position was his fear of the Huns defecting, given Gelimer's offer of rewards for those who lagged behind. In the morning, the Byzantine vanguard was surprised when it suddenly ran into Gelimer's army positioned on the other side of the creek they were passing. When the Byzantines noticed Gelimer's forces, John the Armenian ordered the cavalry to take up their positions. Belisarius entrusted him with command of the army during the initial stages of the battle. He also ordered his men to use their swords in battle, recognizing the Vandals' vulnerability to archers. Assuming Gelimer was not expecting a battle, John the Armenian decided not to wait for his infantry to catch up, as they outnumbered them by at least 2, and ordered an attack on the Gallagher forces. The battle began when a few troops from the Byzantine centre attacked the flank centre and engaged in a skirmish. The Byzantine cavalry attacked with massive firepower during the engagement. Zazon was wounded and fell. His death signalled to the Vandals that their leader had been killed. It wasn't long before the Vandals withdrew. Gelimer, seeing his brother's death, ordered his cavalry to withdraw after the ensuing chaos. The Byzantines advanced, inflicting heavy damage on the Vandals, which only deepened their panic. The Vandals withdrew from the battlefield, alarming the Venetians who were still engaged in the battle. An estimated 800 Vandals were killed, while only 50 Byzantine soldiers remained after this disastrous adventure. After Gelimer of Cameroon fled to Mons Papua, Belisarius rode to the city of Hippogrigus, which he captured without any resistance in the entire Vandal kingdom. The remaining soldiers were taken prisoner. Bonifacio finally decided that his best chance of survival was to surrender Gelimer's reserves. Sources describe Gelimer as a broken man, constantly betrayed by his officials and barely able to feed himself. He held out in the mountains during the harsh winter of 533–534, but in March, after enduring hunger, cold and heavy guarding, he was finally ready to surrender. Belisarius accepted his surrender, thus ending the Vandal War. Justinian decided to pursue victory and annex Sardinia, Corsica and the Balearic Islands. He felt so confident that he took the titles of Vandalicus and Africanus. Later that year, Justinian summoned Belisarius to Constantinople. Belisarius took with him 2,000 Vandal warriors and the humiliated Gelimer. A triumphal procession was held in the city, where Gelimer was ceremoniously stripped of his purple cloak. This public humiliation once again confirmed the subservience of the remaining Vandals to the Byzantine emperor.